Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the 19th Annual Psychology Day at United Nations. I am Harleen Kaur, an Assistant Professor of Psychology at OP Jindal Global University in India. I welcome you all on the behalf of Psychology Coalition at United Nations at our 19th Annual Psychology Day. Our theme for today is Psychological Contribution in Fostering UN Collective Actions in uncertain times, advancing human rights in a world in conflict. Having said that, it seems to be very pertinent in a world that we are living in. I now introduce my fellow co-chair, Dr. Gurusevak Khalsa, Associate Professor of Practice at American University in Cairo, Egypt, for moderating the session today.
Thank you, Dr. Carr. Thank you, Harleen. And welcome everybody again to the 19th Annual Psychology Day at the United Nations. My name is Dr. Gurusevak Khalsa. I'm a counseling psychologist and I'm Associate Professor of Practice at the American University in Cairo in Egypt. I have a background in international mental health services with over 6 years of experience providing community-based support for internally displaced and refugee groups in Afghanistan and South Sudan, here in Egypt, and resettled refugee communities in the United States. I've served as the chair of the American Psychological Association's Committee for Global Psychology, and I'm very excited to be here today to hear from some of our distinguished speakers. As Dr. Carr mentioned, our theme for today is one that's very important to talk about for all of us. It's certainly in this day and age, because of the current world is marked by conflict and uncertainty, with more than 120 armed conflicts affecting people all over the world. The UN Charter represents a significant effort to address this uncertainty through multilateral international collaboration and cooperation. The formation of the UN in 1945 was itself a recognition that conflict and uncertainty in the modern world is a collective experience which affects all of us. And the recognition of the idea that what affects one of us affects the rest of us. To address these regional and global conflicts and uncertainty is an inherently collaborative process. The UN has several sustainable development goals that try to create action, collective action so we can work together along these important topics. And along those lines, psychological science offers many resources to support those sustainable development goals. As Dr. Harleen Kaur mentioned, the theme for this year's Annual Psychology Day is Psychological Contributions to Fostering Collective Action in Uncertain Times, Advancing Human Rights in a World in Conflict. This reflects a call for action for all of us, as outlined by the President of the UN General Assembly in her inaugural speech, summarized very succinctly by the phrase, "Better Together." Here on the 2026 Psychology Day, we will feature 4 distinguished speakers who will be discussing their work in developing psychological science to support action, human rights, and empowerment in the modern world, as outlined by 4 significant sub-themes. Our 4 sub-themes for today are peace building and collective healing in a world in conflict, from climate anxiety to climate action, mobilizing for environmental justice, global migration and the protection of human rights, which is fostering belonging across borders, and advancing gender equality through intersectional allyship and shared power. Each of our 4 speakers will give a presentation on one of these 4 topics, and we look forward to hearing their presentations. However, first, before we hear from our speakers, I would like to introduce some important members of the Psychology Coalition team and hear a few words from them. The first is Dr. Kalani Gopal, who is serving as the president of the PCUN. Dr. Gopal is a distinguished clinical psychologist with over 3 decades of experience in addressing complex issues such as child sexual abuse, human trafficking, and labor trafficking. She is the founder of the Safe Coalition for Human Rights, an initiative dedicated to supporting trauma patients and victims globally. Dr. Gopal has trained a diverse range of professionals, including foster parents, law enforcement agencies, and government representatives from various countries. She's the first woman of color and the first Asian American to serve as the president of the Illinois Psychological Association and Division 12 of the American Psychological Association. Her work has garnered international recognition, and she has developed clinical manuals, treatment manuals for psychologists in Mongolia, treated grieving families in Myanmar, and created tools for identifying trafficking victims in Ukraine. Her dedication to mental health and human rights continues to inspire and impact communities worldwide. Dr. Gopal, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so very much, and good morning and welcome, everyone. Your Excellency, Ambassador Dr. Chola Mulambo, Permanent Mission of Zambia to the United Nations, to our distinguished speakers, our co-chairs, Dr. Khalsa and Kaur, our 12 NGO members of the Psychology Coalition of accredited NGOs at the UN, our colleagues, advocates, and stakeholders joining us from across the globe. I am deeply honored to welcome you to the 19th Psychology Day at the UN. Since our inception, PCUN has stood where the science of human behavior meets the heavy machinery of global diplomacy and governance. Together, we have built a legacy of researchers, clinicians, stakeholders, policymakers, and advocates who understand that the world's most complex problems cannot be solved without the marriage of psychology and institutional governance. PCUN hosts 4 powerful committees, and I invite you to join us. This year's theme emerged from the world that we're living in now: shifting economies, moving borders, deeply conflicting ideologies, active armed conflict on multiple continents, millions of forcibly displaced individuals, democratic institutions under siege, the UN nations navigating treacherous waves of tsunami pain. The mental health toll of sustained global uncertainty, never more acute, never more documented, and never more in need of experts in psychological science. This is why our organization, PCUN, exists. Together, we have developed youth frameworks, placed mental health institutions at the forefront, provided valuable data in the hands of decision makers, and will be hosting our Mental Health Forum for Youth later this year. When we talk about peace building, we're talking about how distrust and dehumanization spreads, how empathy can be cultivated across the deepest of divides. When we talk about climate action, we are talking about the motivational architecture that drives or inhibits collective response. And we talk about gender equality, it's about identity, power, and liberation. And then when we talk about global migration, it's about trauma, resilience, and belonging. Every one of these conversations belongs to us, and everyone demands our expertise. The speakers you will hear today, Dr. Bonke on peace building, Dr. Steg on climate action, Dr. Henry on gender equality, and Dr. Olanrewaju on global migration, represent the very, very best of our field, rigorous scholarship translated into human-centered frameworks with real policy implications. The world is asking questions that psychology can answer. The data exists, the framework exists, and the expertise is in this very room. And this coalition exists to ensure we're always organized enough, visible enough, persistent enough to be heard where decisions are made. And in these times, connection, collaboration, collective action, and carrying forward the 4 C's must begin with each of us in how we choose to work together and how our dedication persists. Let us not be bystanders in this moment of history. And I'm so proud of this work. I'm proud of our community, and I'm genuinely honored to open this forum together. Welcome to the 19th Annual Psychology Day at the UN. And we want to suggest that this program, we want to emphasize that this program was made possible in no small part by a founding member NGO, the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, whom we thank for hosting us today. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Kopal. Next, I would like to introduce our United Nations co-sponsor for the 19th Annual Psychology Day, the UN Ambassador to the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Zambia, His Excellency, Dr. Chola Milambo, who will share with us a few words on these important topics. Your Excellency, welcome. We're honored to have you join us today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Castle. Distinguished representatives of the Psychological Coalition at the United Nations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to address this distinguished gathering on the occasion of the Psychological Day at the United Nations. I extend my sincere appreciation to the organizers for convening this important platform and for their continued efforts to bring the insights of psychological science into the hearts of multilateral dialogue. At a time when the world faces increasingly uncertainty, marked by conflict, climate challenges, and widening inequalities, the importance of mental health and psychological well-being has never been clearer. They are no longer peripheral concerns. They are central to the realization of peace, sustainable development, and human dignity. This gathering is especially timely as it aligns closely with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, particularly goal number 3 on good health and well-being. There's a growing global recognition that mental health is not only a public health priority, but also a fundamental human right. Without addressing psychological well-being, our efforts to achieve sustainable development will remain incomplete. This year's theme speaks directly to the challenges before us. In a world shaped by rapid change and complex crises, the field of psychology offers valuable tools to better understand human behavior, strengthen resilience, and foster social cohesion. Whether we are addressing climate anxiety, supporting communities affected by displacement, addressing gender equality, or indeed promoting peace and security, the human dimension remains at the center, at the core. Psychological insights help us move beyond policy frameworks to truly understand how individuals and communities experience, respond to, and recover from adversity. In this regard, fostering a sense of belonging, trust, and shared purpose is essential. Collective action requires not only political will, but also an understanding of the human factors that drive cooperation, empathy, and solidarity across borders. Ladies and gentlemen, Zambia recognizes that mental health is not only a public health priority, but also a fundamental pillar of sustainable development and social cohesion. In our national context, we are working to strengthen community-based approaches to mental health care, promote awareness, and reduce stigma, while aligning our efforts with global frameworks, such as the Sustainable Development Goals. We believe that investing in psychology well-being is essential to building resilient societies capable of responding to today's complex challenges. Zambia remains committed to contributing to global efforts that advance dignity, inclusion, and equitable access to care. As we move forward, it is essential that we continue to build bridges between policymakers, researchers, and practitioners. The integration of psychological science into global policymaking can enhance our collective ability to respond effectively to today's challenges and to build a more resilient, compassionate world. In closing, I commend the Psychological Coalition at the United Nations for its leadership and dedication. I wish you fruitful discussions and meaningful outcomes for this important event. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your message and support. We at PCUN highly appreciate your time, efforts, and your message, and we will try to do our best with the message and we'll take away with the same. I would like now to invite Professor Kimberly Khan, President of Society for Psychological Study of Social Issues, SPSSI, for her message. Professor Khan works at the Portland State University. She's a professor with extensive and rich experience in psychology. I welcome you, Professor Khan, for your message.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here today. I'm Dr. Kimberly Barsamian Khan, and I'm a professor of social psychology at Portland State University in Portland, Oregon, in the United States. My area of expertise is on the psychology of prejudice and bias, particularly as it applies to policing interactions and how to reduce racial bias in policing. I'm so happy to welcome everyone to the 19th Annual Psychology Day at the United Nations today, and to represent the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues, known as SPSSI, as the current president. And I'm also very happy to be joined by SPSSI's UN team today, who've helped support programming at prior Psychology Day at the UN events, and SPSSI is happy to be hosting the virtual portion of PDUN this year. I'd like to take a few moments to share a brief background about SPSSI as an organization and its relationship with the UN. SPSSI has been represented at the United Nations as an NGO since 1987 and serves as a consultant to the UN Economic and Social Council. In this role, SPSSI has helped prepare statements, policy papers, hosted panels, and presentations to help inform worldwide policy on pressing social issues. Today's programming and speakers center on core critical social issues, including peacebuilding, climate justice, gender equity, and global migration, which are really at the heart of SPSSI's research mission and commitment to social justice. This year, we celebrate SPSSI's 90th anniversary. SPSSI was founded in 1936 during the Great Depression to promote evidence-based policies informed by psychological science that advances human rights and social justice. Our social justice lens leads us to focus on uplifting marginalized and underrepresented voices. Today, we represent a group of about 3,000 scientists from psychology and related social science field whose research addresses social issues and policy. And we share a common value of making a more socially just and equitable world. SPSSI has been closely aligned with the social issues of the day throughout our 90-year history, including key timely historical research responding to world events such as World War II, women's rights, and the civil rights movement. Today, we continue our focus on the social issues of the day with priorities including immigration, criminal justice reform, educational inequities, poverty, war and violence, health disparities, reproductive justice, and the climate crisis. As an organization, SPSSI regularly funds cutting-edge research on social issues through grants. Fellowships put SPSSI members annually working with Congress. Our journals publish timely social issues-related research. Our members author policy statements and briefings. And our annual conference highlights our members' research. And we'll be celebrating our 90th anniversary this year at our conference this June in New Orleans. SPSSI is proud to be here as a member association in the PCUN, Psychology Coalition of NGOs at the United Nations, which represents psychology organizations with consultative status to the UN, and we're very proud of this relationship. Thank you again to the organizers of Psychology Day at the UN, which really helps celebrate and uplift the essential and critical role that psychology plays. That psychology plays in helping the UN achieve its mission and address critical global issues. So I'll close by thanking you again for inviting SPSSI to this important table, and we're very happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khan. We are certainly glad to have you with us as well. And thank you for sharing some of the history of SPSSI. Congratulations on the 90th anniversary. That's a big one for sure. Now that we've heard from some of our PCUN team, I would like to introduce the program that we have for us today. For our program, we'll hear from our 4 distinguished speakers individually, and then followed by a panel discussion with all 4 speakers together. For our attendees, we have a place to submit your questions at the bottom of the screen. We'll collect your questions and collate them. We'll have a chance for our speakers to answer questions individually after their presentations. And we will also have more time for questions for our speakers to answer those questions collectively and the panel discussion, which will be at the end of the program. The chat function is disabled, but you're welcome to submit your questions anytime during the program. We look forward to hearing them. That being said, I would like us to get started and hear from our speakers. This is what we're here for today. So with no further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, Dr. Klaus Bonnke. Dr. Bonnke is a senior professor at the Social Science Methodology at Constructor University in Bremen University. He holds a Doctor Scientiarum or habilitation degree in psychology from Freie Universität Berlin and a PhD degree in psychology from, please forgive my German pronunciation, I'll do my best, but Technische Universität Berlin, a technical university in Berlin. His research focuses on processes of political socialization and the intergenerational transmission of value preferences. He received the Ralph K. White Lifetime Achievement Peace Psychology Award from the American Psychological Association, and he's here today to talk to us about his work on peace building. Dr. Bonnke, welcome. We look forward to hearing your presentation.
Hello. I hope I can overcome the technical problems we had earlier in the session, but I'm quite confident that I can. And yes, this looks like I can. I hope you can see my presentation at least in a non-presentation mode. I'll change to presentation mode and keep my fingers crossed that it will still work out. Yes, at least on my screen, I can see what I want to see. Greetings again from me. I'm Klaus Bonnke from Constructor University in Bremen, Germany. If you want to know where Bremen is, if you draw a line from Hamburg to Amsterdam, then it's 1/3 of the way. And my presentation today is A Life for Peace Building and Collective Healing in a World in Conflict. But there's a subtitle, namely Evidence from a 40-year longitudinal study. A longitudinal study has two meanings, but I want to reduce it to one meaning, namely a longitudinal study is a panel study. That is, the same people are surveyed, are interviewed again and again and again and again. That's a panel study. And now don't fear this. The next one is the only text slide that I have. Don't bother with reading it. What we've done is we have surveyed 242 German adolescents who are now in their 50s, so they're 52, 53 years old, and we have surveyed them starting in 1985. And have asked them again or surveyed them again 11 times in 3.5-year intervals, 88, 89, the last time was 22, 23, 24. So we followed their lives, so to speak, from the Cold War to the war in Ukraine. And what did we find out? And this is then to the topic of, healing eventually, but what I want to present you is that there was omnipresence in their lives of war. So take a look at this graph. We asked them, for example, what is your greatest fear? In an open question, then we categorize the open question, and they mentioned fear of war to different extent throughout their lives. Now, this is a curve of how many of our participants mentioned fear of war as their first mentioned fear. Now, if you look at this graph, you see that in 1985, almost 50% mentioned this as their first mentioned fear of war. And now we're in 23, 24, current days, we're again at 14%, but there was a major drop in the beginning. Now, you see my punchline down there is fear of war peaked in 1985, then in 2002, 2003, 16, 17, and 23, 24. Now, you may have your own narrative about what could have been the reasons, but I'll give you a short hint by supplementing the presentation by what went on during that time. So before we started the study, we had the Cold War, we had the arms race, we had nuclear missiles deployed on German soil. Then we asked them in 1985. Between 85 and 89, we had the nuclear accident in Chernobyl. Then came the Gulf War. Then came the war in Bosnia. Then in another part of former Yugoslavia, in Kosovo. Then there came 9/11, the war in Iraq, the ever-recurrent war in Congo, the civil war in Syria, the so-called, at least what in Europe we call the refugee crisis in 15, 16, the war in Yemen, and most recently the war in Ukraine. But whenever you look at these graphs, you have to remember that this is a panel study, that the people also grew older during these times. So I supplement this again. We know from this graph that the fear of war peaked during the last years of Cold War, after 9/11, you will probably have guessed that, after the refugee crisis, and after the beginning of the war in Ukraine. That's these bubbles I have there. But what you don't see yet, or what you may have guessed, what was the average age of these people? The average age in the first wave of measurement, as we call it, was 14. And I said every 3.5 years we reapproached them. So 17.5, 21, and now they're 52.5. And where were their peaks? Peaks were there when they were 14, so when they were adolescents. Then when they were 31.5, so when they had their first child, probably. Germany's something like 28, 29 at that time, first child. Then was at 45.5. Well, there probably the refugee crisis was more important than age. And now they're 52.5, and we had another event, namely the war in Ukraine. So fear of war peaked when participants were in the mid-teens, their early 30s, their mid-40s, and their early 50s. We also asked them for their hope for peace. You see, asking the two things is not something very different. Fear of war and hope for peace follow essentially the same pattern, so I can progress rather quickly from this slide. But how does it go along with political activism? Do people do something with their fears or for their hopes? And there you see that it's not exactly the same trends fears take and political activism take. So in the very beginning, political activism was lower than the fears. So fears hampered kind of political activism. In their late 20s, early 30s, their activism was below their level of fear of war. Why that? Well, they had their first child. They couldn't be very active. They had their activities somewhere else. And now it has met, I would say, in their early 50s, 2.5 years ago, or a year and a half ago, it met, and activism was essentially on the level of fear of war. So, summary, fear of war tends to be slightly lower when activism is higher, but with exceptions. So life events also play a role. Let me summarize let me give a preliminary summary. Mentioning war as a greatest fear was most prevalent in the early years of the study, that is, in the aftermath of the Cold War and the nuclear accident in Chernobyl. Hopes for peace and fear of war follow the same pattern, with hopes expressed more frequently the older participants have grown. Fears of war are expressed more frequently by participants who are not politically active. Life events seem to play an important role in how active people are in the face of an unpeaceful world. Activism, understandably, is reduced when children are born. Now let me look. What is the relation between hopes for peace and self-reported happiness? In the bluish color, you see again the well-known trend line that I've shown before, and what you see there, this is well known from psychological research, that if you ask people for happiness, the average is almost all the time on the same level. This is called set point theory, but that doesn't play an important role. Self-reported happiness is a bit lower, but it's just unimportant, I would say, when yearning for peace is stronger. So there is a relationship, a clear relationship, but it's not very convincing if you see these graphs. But when hopes for peace are strong, political activism is high. There are exceptions, that's the bubbles, and life events play a role again, but political activism tends to be higher when people yearn for peace more, if I may use this terminology again. I come to my close because this is the result that surprised me most. It is a result that compares a finding from the very first measurement in 1985 when people were 14. And this is the, I connect my presentation to the next presentation. We asked them how strong are their concerns about the environmental destruction. And those of you who are able to read these funny statistical coefficients, there's a correlation of 0.78. Now, this is high anyway, but this is across the years from 1985 to 23-24. So what people said regarding their strong environmental concerns in 1985, the same people, determines their high level of political activism. So activism is breeded in adolescence, in late adolescence, to be even more precise. Environmentally concerned 14-year-olds are highly likely to be politically interested and active in their early 50s, many, many years later. So mid-adolescents need particular attention. Now we come to policy conclusions, and I'm done then, regarding their feelings of a world in threat. Being politically active against perceived threats does not at all endanger mental health. Yearning for world peace may reduce individual level of happiness, but it motivates political activism. Among the participants in my study, expressing concern for the world out there, the environment, and adolescence has set the stage for leading a life of political activism in mid-adulthood. Danke für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit. Gracias por su atención. Spasiba za vaše vнимание. And now I have to look at my cheat sheet. Shokran ala itimamikrom kom gansye ninda gwanju. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bunke, for that very interesting and pointed presentation on this important topic. I am also feeling some solidarity in the challenges of pronouncing words in different languages, so thank you for that as well. I know it's not easy. We do have one question from one person in our attendance who asks, should we be promoting environmental concerns in adolescence, or at least connecting to nature, perhaps?
Okay, it depends a bit how the question is meant. If of course we shouldn't do any scare tactics. If that end of the question, so it doesn't feel good to say, oh, how terrible is the environment, and then we will breed people who are politically active for the rest of their lives. No, that shouldn't be as it should be understood. But at the same time, if you are concerned, this should lead to active participation in the political life around you. And this is by no means, we had media campaigns in the beginning that said with our study we're scaring children. No, we're not scaring children. We are making children fit for life with this kind of study. So no scare tactics, of course, but an openness for the political world is important.
Thank you for that answer. One more question if we have some time. In light of your findings, what do you think about voting age at 16?
Well, of course, this is an opinion question, and forgive me if I am provocative in my response to that. I am in favor of voting age 0. This means, of course, that babies cannot vote, but parents have to take care of their children, so they can enact the vote for a certain time. I think voting at age 16 is by all means not at all a problem. It is very appropriate, and also what this said, we had study participants who were on average 14, and it said how important this early age is, and this means that voting and democratic participation is something that cannot come early enough, from my perspective.
Thank you very much for that answer. And thank you again for your presentation. Thank you for your talk on this important topic. We have additional questions, but we will save them for the roundtable discussion. It would be great to hear more of your thoughts on this, especially as it relates to the UN and the mission, the goals that the UN has.
Yes, of course. I'll stop my sharing now so others can take the screen.
Thank you again. Next up, I would like to introduce our second speaker. This will be Dr. Linda Steg, who will be speaking on the topic of climate action. Dr. Steg is a professor of environmental psychology at the University of Groningen. She studies factors influencing sustainable behavior, the effects and acceptability of strategies aimed at promoting sustainable behavior, and public perceptions of technology and system changes. She's a member of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, the European Academy of Sciences and Arts, and the Netherlands Scientific Climate Council. She's lead author of the IPCC Special Report on 1.5 degrees Celsius. I apologize if I have that acronym wrong, AR6 and AR7. She participates in various interdisciplinary and international research programs and collaborates with practitioners working in industry, governments, and NGOs. Dr. Steg, welcome. We look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you. You can see my presentation, right?
I can see it on my end. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, good. Yeah, thank you for inviting me to this exciting event. I feel honored to talk about what motivates people to engage in climate action. I think my presentation also nicely follows up, aligns with the previous one. So you probably have seen all types of images in the media like this, climate emergency. People are really expressing concerns about climate change, also anxious about climate change. The IPCC tells the world over and again, climate change is happening, it is caused by human behavior, and it will have severe negative impacts. So before I start, 2 questions to you to reflect on. I will present data of a European social survey already collected some years ago, but these numbers don't change that much. And I have 2 questions for you. Big representative samples from Europe. What percentage of these people indicate that climate change is not happening, so is denying climate change? Yeah, think a bit about it a bit. And then the second question, of those who think climate change is happening, what percentage thinks it's not caused by human behavior, it's a natural phenomenon? Whenever I come up with questions like this, people always come up with very high numbers, very high percentages, because we have the feeling that many people deny climate change and that it's caused by human behavior. But it's actually not the case. So what you see here is that a large majority indicates climate change is happening, acknowledges it, that this is the case. It's only 2% that denies that this is the case. And it's also, if you look at opinion polls in the US, you see slightly higher numbers, about 8% denying it really firmly, but also large majority indicating climate change is happening. Also, large majority indicates that it has to do with our behavior. They don't think it's a pure natural phenomenon. So lack of climate beliefs, denying climate beliefs that climate is happening, that's not the issue. The issue is, how can we motivate, encourage, help people to act upon these beliefs? In a recent study in different European countries that focused on negative emission technologies, which implies that you capture and store CO2 in a certain way, underground, for example, or by planting trees. And we asked people in this questionnaire study, large questionnaire study, what if you would have to decide on how to achieve climate goals? How would you distribute the shares among renewable energy provision use, using nuclear energy, implementing negative emission technologies, or behavior change? And here you see that a large proportion of this, about a quarter of the efforts people think should be based on behavior change. So people think behavior change should be part of the solution. And there's other studies also showing over and again, there's a high willingness among people to act upon climate change because they are concerned. But they not always do so. So many people still engage in many actions that would increase climate change. So what can we do to motivate them and to help them to engage in more climate actions? Well, there's many things that we can do. And here are some of the pictures of the most impactful that we can do. So the IPCC latest report, AR6, indicated that behavior change has big potential. If it's supported by the right infrastructure, it can save about 40 to 70% of emissions. And the most impactful behaviors would be transporting ourselves more sustainably. So fly less, drive less with fossil-fueled cars, but rather use electric car or even better public transportation or slow transport, active transport. It's good for your health as well. Better renovating our home, insulating it, for example, make better use of renewable energy sources, and changing our diets. So eating less animal-based proteins, which is actually also good for your health. So it has multiple benefits. And what we can do is also try to change the system. For example, vote for green parties or protest to demand for more climate action. I'll come back to this later. So because we can do so many things, we in Groningen also are interested in more general factors, the general motivating factors that motivate people to engage in climate action over and again and in many different actions. And one of the factors that we consider are values. And we define values as general goals that people strive for in their life. So what you generally think it is important. And there's 4 types of values particularly relevant for understanding climate action or pro-environmental action more broadly. 2 of these make people focus on their own interest. That's hedonic values. We want to have pleasure in our life, reduce effort. And egoistic values, that means that we want to enhance our resources. So we want to save money or enhance our status, for example. And in many cases, doing something good for the environment, engaging in climate action, is not the most pleasurable thing to do, and it's not the most profitable thing to do. So people with strong hedonic and egoistic values tend to be less likely to engage in climate action. Not always, because cycling on a sunny day is pleasurable, for example, and if you would turn down the heating, you would save money as well. But in many cases, there is a conflict. But people don't only care about their own interest, they also care about other people and the environment. So they also care about collective qualities. So altruistic values mean that people care about the well-being of other people, not only close others, but also distant others in other parts of the world or future generations for that matter. And they care about nature and the environment. So they also endorse biospheric values. And obviously, the more strongly you endorse altruistic and biospheric values, the more likely you are to engage in climate action. You see that the size of the pictures differ a bit. And I did this to indicate what we find in many studies about the strength of these values. So bottom line, many people care about nature and the environment. Many people strongly endorse altruistic and biospheric values. Particularly compared to egoistic values. So there's also a value basis for climate action. Well, you can target these values, of course, to motivate climate action. For example, by making people aware of the benefits of a certain climate action for themselves or for their finances, for example, or for the environment. And that's what we did in a study that we conducted in the US some years ago already. We wanted to see what motivates people to check their tire pressure, because if your tires are properly inflated, you save gasoline. If you save gasoline, you save money, and you would also emit less CO2. So we tested 3 different appeals: a control appeal, no argument provided; a financial appeal indicating if you check your tire pressure, you inflate it properly, you would save money; or the environment, if you do so, you would protect the environment, you would emit less CO2. So which one of these would be most effective, do you think? Well, in most audience that I present this, probably you as well, people think the financial appeal is most effective because it's tangible. You have it immediately in the pocket. Everyone knows what a dollar saved or a euro saved would be. Well, an environmental benefit, it's long-term, and people have not a clear understanding what it implied anyway. But what we found is that the environmental appeal is most effective and the financial appeal the least effective. So we did some follow-up studies to understand why this is happening. Well, for the financial appeal, one important issue is that many of the behaviors that we do would save us only a few dollars per year or so. So when people think about, okay, I need to engage in this action, but what would it bring me? Not that much. And that's actually what we find in the study, where we presented people with different types of climate actions and either indicated how much money they could save or how much CO2 emissions would reduce. And we asked them, to what extent do you think this behavior is worth the effort? And then people think that the exact same behavior is more worth the effort if we emphasize the environmental benefit compared to the financial benefit. So people think it's not worth the effort. So why do they think that acting on climate change is worth the effort? Well, because doing good makes us feel good. Aristotle has already introduced the concept eudaimonia. We not only feel good by doing pleasurable things, hedonia, but also by doing meaningful things, eudaimonia. Professor Bunke already referred to the relationship between well-being and climate action or protesting. It was, I think, right? That there's not a negative correlation. What we found in many studies, and also meta-analysis have been showing this, that engaging in climate actions is not only bothersome and effortful and reducing the hedonic pleasure, but it also makes us feel good. And overall, there's a positive correlation by doing something good for the environment, acting on climate change, and feeling good. So doing something good for the environment or for other people can enhance our well-being, because we do something meaningful, we contribute to the greater group. So I now indicated there's a value basis for climate action. Many people are aware climate change is happening. Many people think more should happen, but still we are facing these problems, right? So because we still, climate change is still increasing. So, and not everyone will be motivated to the same extent. So we also did some studies on how can we motivate the less motivated people who care a little bit less, relatively less about climate change or the environment. And one thing that we considered is the role of identity, self-identity, the way that people see themselves, and group identity, the way they perceive their group. And both might be ways to motivate the less motivated. Let me start by self-identity. The extent, we did some studies on environmental self-identity, which we define as the extent to which you think you are a pro-environmental person. And people are likely to and motivated to act upon such an identity because we want to be consistent. It feels not good if we act not in line with how we see ourselves. This environmental self-identity is obviously stronger among people with stronger biospheric values who care more about nature and the environment, but it's also influenced by our past behavior. So if we think about our own behavior, and we realize we did many things to protect the environment, to limit climate change, we might also see ourselves more as a pro-environmental person and act upon it. On the other way around as well, if we think back and we realize that we did not act pro-environmentally, the environmental self-identity might be weakened and we're less likely to act pro-environmentally. And many campaigns, at least in the Netherlands in that time, emphasize the many things that we don't do to protect the environment. So from this research, you would say, emphasize more what people already do so that they start seeing themselves more as a green person and act accordingly. Our behavior is also influenced by the groups that we belong to. I'll give you one example of studies we did in this line of research. One relevant group in which many of us participate on a daily basis almost is at work, right? And many companies, organizations have adopted corporate environmental responsibility as their aim and strategy. So that means that they have an explicit goal to reduce their environmental impact and also implemented policies, strategies to achieve those goals. And we wanted to know, does this affect the behavior of employees? So would it be that employees who think their company is has a stronger goal to protect the environment and also implemented strategies to achieve that goal, are they more likely to act pro-environmentally at work themselves? So what we found is that first, biospheric values promote pro-environmental behavior at work as well, indicating in line with value theory, values not only affect our daily life in the private sphere, but also in other contexts like at work. But people are also more likely to act pro-environmentally and to engage in climate action when they think their company endorses these goals, has the goal to reduce its environmental impact. And we even found that it's corporate environmental responsibility. So the more people think my company has the goal to reduce its environmental impact and implement strategy to achieve it, the more people, this is particularly promoting climate action among those who don't care about nature and the environment themselves that strongly. So among those with weaker biospheric values. So being part of a green group can particularly motivate people who are less green themselves. So this is a way to motivate the less motivated people. These are ways to do so, but still many people might not act accordingly because our behavior is, of course, not only depending on our motivation, but also on the context. And unfortunately, current societies are organized in a way that climate action and pro-environmental actions are oftentimes not the most attractive one, and sometimes also not feasible. So if you want people to have to adopt a vegan diet, they should understand how to cook a vegan meal, a healthy and tasty vegan meal. Many people might not know how to do so. If you want people to transport more sustainably, the facilities should be there. There should be public transport infrastructure or safe bicycle routes. Without recycling facilities, people can't recycle. Sometimes subsidies are needed because climate actions is relatively too expensive for many people. Insulating your home is not a thing that many people can do. Not everyone can do it. Or buying an electric vehicle, not everyone can afford it. So system changes are needed as well. But and my students then often think now, especially recently, start saying like, stop bothering people, the individual, the consumer. Systems should change, and then they have the tendency to sit back and say, well, let's wait until the system changes because we can't bother and stress consumers too much. But of course, we can also take action to increase the likelihood that these systems change. So we can take actions to influence other individuals, to talk with other people about what they can do and why it might be important to do so. We can influence governments by protesting and participating in climate marches, for example, or voting for green parties. And we can influence businesses by speaking out in the organizations that we work for, or by boycotting organizations that are not climate friendly, for example. So we can also engage in all kinds of actions to urge other actors to do more so that systems will change and climate actions become more affordable and also attractive. We recently did a study how people think about the role of different actors, because it's often what you often get the idea like people blame others for causing climate change. They think others should do things because others are more responsible and capable of doing so. So we ask people about the role of different actors in mitigating climate change. We ask them who's responsible for causing it, who's responsible for limiting it, who can take actions, whose actions will be most effective, who is motivated to act, who is currently acting, and who's intending to act. Well, you see some difference across groups, right? People think governments and businesses are somewhat more responsible and capable. But the most important thing here is that people acknowledge that all groups are to some extent responsible and capable. They also think that most groups don't act upon it. So most groups do too little and are not sufficiently motivated to do so. So
Dr.
it's not.
I hate to interrupt on your very important topic. We're just running short on time.
Yeah.
I'm really appreciating the action-oriented content you have here, and I just want to make sure we have time for other speakers as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'll give you one more interesting finding based on the same study. We did not only ask people about the role of actors as a group, but also about their individual role as a professional or as a consumer. And don't look into the details. The only thing I want to emphasize here is that you see for the responsibility and capability a big gap for employees in a business organizations, much bigger than for citizens. So it seems that individuals within organizations don't acknowledge their responsibility and capability. So my conclusion, multiple motivations affect climate actions. People are intrinsically motivated to act on climate change. And the more they do, the more likely they are to act accordingly because they strongly care about nature and the environment. But we need to create a context that activates and supports intrinsic motivation and offers other benefits as well. thank you very much.
Thank
I
you as
always
well, Dr. Stay.
this is the group whose work I have been presenting.
It's a great picture. And certainly important topic. I feel like we could hear much more on that topic in greater detail. And I apologize for cutting it short. We will have more time in the panel discussion to dive into it in more depth, hopefully. But really appreciating your presentation. Thank you again. We have some questions, but what we'll do is postpone them to the panel discussion so that we can hear from our next speaker. And along those lines, I would like to introduce Dr. Hanny Henry, who will be talking on the subject of gender equality. Dr. Henry is the current chair and professor of psychology at the American University in Cairo. He earned his PhD in clinical psychology from Miami University of Ohio in 2006. He's a member of the American Psychological Association. At the American University in Cairo, Dr. Henry has taught a wide range of undergraduate and graduate courses. He's also developed new courses, including Fundamentals of Counseling, Psychopathology and Resilience Across Cultures, Advanced Human Development, and the Psychology of Dreams. His research examines the roles of culture, broadly defined, and its influence on psychological processes, particularly among marginalized and underprivileged populations. His work has addressed cultural issues affecting immigrants, refugees, Egyptian women, gay men, and transgender women, as well as the impact of culture on therapy and parenting. His studies have been published in leading peer-reviewed journals, and Dr. Henry has contributed significantly to the development of psychology at AUC. He's previously served as the head of the psychology unit, chair of the Department of Sociology, Anthropology, and Psychology, and Egyptology, and Associate Dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences. He's played a key role in launching the counseling and community psychology programs in the region. In the clinical field, Dr. Henry is an active practitioner and clinical supervisor. Dr. Henry, we're glad to have you with us, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. Good morning or good evening, everyone. It's such an honor to be here. I really enjoyed the presentation so far, and I've learned a lot. I'm just going to give you more of a qualitative study, no numbers here. I feel that as a clinical psychologist, qualitative studies have been always my passion because they do give voice to the participants, and they also help us build theories beyond the mainstream psychology. And so we do use the mainstream theories, but then we need to modify them and elaborate them and make them culturally relevant. And that's what I've been doing throughout my research. First, I want to acknowledge Zainab Gammel, my assistant, who has helped me with the literature review here. As you can see from the title, it's Empowerment in Action, Bridging Critical Pedagogy and Relational Resources to Resist Sexual Harassment. So I'm going to talk about qualitative studies that we have conducted, and I'm also going to talk about the implications of this study for the fight against sexual harassment in Egypt. So this is an overview of what I'll be talking about today, an overview of the study that is. I will examine how Egyptian women currently resist sexual harassment in public space using an empowerment principle or framework. We will understand women's interpretation of harassment and the form of agency they exercise in fighting it. And also, because this is a qualitative study that will give voice to the participant, we will highlight the cultural factors influencing how empowerment is expressed in the Egyptian cultural context. And finally, if I have time, I'll talk about the implications for psychological science and practitioner. So for the sake of the study, this is a definition of what sexual harassment is. It refers to humiliating, degrading, and marginalizing practices perpetrated on people because of their sex. That's a Berdal definition. And so we cannot deny that sexual harassment has become a huge problem in Egypt, raising significant concerns. It also shaped women's everyday use of urban environments and their sense of safety. The UN has actually had a very scary statistics where it says 99% of women experienced some form of sexual harassment, but then they withdrew the study. But there are other studies that actually can give us a picture of why this is an issue, and we need to support women in fighting it. A study of 976 female students at Kafr Sheikh University found that approximately 40% of participants had experienced sexual harassment. Higher exposure observed among urban students because this university has both urban and rural students. Also, even research conducted among female nurses in Upper Egypt indicated over half of the participants had been exposed to at least one form of workplace sexual harassment, with verbal harassment being the most prevalent. So that's the bad news. The good news is that women are fighting it and they're doing a great fight. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. But let me just tell you about the conceptual framework that we're using to understand women's experience in Egypt and how they use empowerment to fight sexual harassment. As you know, Paulo Freire is a South American educator who said that empowerment does not come from the knowledge that people gain, but from the way they critically apply it. So if women think about sexual harassment that is rooted in gendered power relations, and if it can be interpreted as a sexist, not just a sexual act, then this insight or this knowledge can actually take them somewhere. But we also need to understand, according to Kabir, that yes, empowerment is important, but it cannot just be inferred from behavior. Don't just fight it, but you also look at the alternative choices, that are available, what is the system looking like, and if it's going to allow you to fight it or to use this empowerment or not. So we did integrate these two models to explain the data, which I will talk about later, but quickly. So we want to look at how women empower themselves in fighting sexual harassment, both from an interpretive level and a structural level. It's okay. I mean, I can fight. I know my right. I can fight. But what about the resources that I have? What about the social conditions? Do they permit the safe and effective responses that would allow women's sense of agency in fighting sexual harassment? So in this qualitative studies, we're starting from this integrated approach. We try to explain the data through this integrated approach, but we also give voices to our participants so that they can help us modify and elaborate this integrative approach. We're using this integration because we want to link perception with action, and we want to connect individual and structural factors, which is something mainstream psychology has been always missing. Not looking at the structural issues that shape their behavior, that shape their emotional reaction, that shape their upbringing. So we actually, this was a convenient sample, we focused on 9 female Egyptian activists who have been outspoken about the problem of sexual harassment. They did this through blogs, Facebook, YouTube, their Twitter account. We collected a significant amount of data and we subjected it to a thematic analysis procedure guided by Brown and Clark. And so the goal was to produce theory-driven themes and data-driven themes. So we're using the theory or the conceptual framework, the integration between Ferrer and Kabir, to explain the data, but then using the data to modify and elaborate our conceptual framework and make it culturally relevant and make it contextually relevant to the situation in Egypt. And so we did find theory-driven themes and data-driven themes. The theory-driven themes, we call it situated agency within structural constraint. So yes, women resist sexual harassment, but they do navigate structural, cultural, and institutional limits. So how do they do that? And if you've been following Egyptian social media, women do not accept sexual harassment anymore. So this is good. The mobile is good. Women have been taping or recording men who have been doing this. This is what we call digital resistance. And they would post it on Facebook. And then the next day, the Ministry of Interior would have, because the video would go viral, they would have the video of the perpetrator or the picture of the perpetrator at their website. So people start to think, okay, women are fighting. They're using digital resistance. Sometimes they also fight in the form of collective exposure. So they would come together and say, there is a particular person that is harassing women in a certain area. We also used to have something called harass map, where people would say, these are the areas where there's a lot of harassment there. So people start using digital media or social media to transform personal experience into public discourse, provide alternative mechanism of accountability when institutions are ineffective, and also enabling relatively safe, though still risky forms of expression. So again, this study does not try to confirm or support the theoretical framework, which is the integration of Ferrer and Kabir, but we're using this framework to explain what women are doing to fight sexual harassment. But the beauty of qualitative research that can also inform you and gives voice to the participant and make your conceptualization or your theoretical framework more culturally relevant and more applicable to the cultural context in which you are doing your studies. So we did find two data-driven themes that are related to our collectivistic nature. Now, we're not generalizing, we're not saying all Egyptians are collectivistic, but it is a trend. And so you can see from women's responses that they have been shaped by the need to maintain social cohesion and also protect reputations. So you can see that although women would try to catch the perpetrator or would try to expose the perpetrator, but some of them would withhold or delay disclosure to protect their own reputation. We also found that something called bounded speaking out, so there would be anonymous disclosure or using the initials of the perpetrator. Another the data-driven theme that informed our conceptualization, we call it speaking out through the moral framing. So sexual harassment has been often interpreted through collective moral frameworks rather than just individual rights discourse. So, for example, it can be framed as, according to this women, as a violation of family dignity, community morality, and a breach of shared social values. So, as you can see, agency is morally negotiated and collectively distributed rather than being purely individual. And that's the beauty of qualitative research. It does give voice to the participant, as I said, and it also give you more of a culturally relevant and contextual meaning to your findings. So resistance to sexual harassment in Egypt is very complex, context dependent. Women do balance agency with social constraints and collectivistic expectations. And as we saw from the data, empowerment involves both action and negotiation. What does this do to, or what is the implication for some, or what are the implications for psychological science and psychologists? I think we need to validate all form of resistance, silence, confrontation, online action, being more culturally inclusive in this approach, understanding the cultural sensitivity, approaching things with a culturally responsive approach. Because I mean, at some point, yes, people want to speak out. There we have a problem, but we need to also think about the cultural factors that shape this women's behavior, or sorry, empowerment. We also need to create a community-based bystander program. So we need to help create resources by training peers to safely intervene and promote collective responsibility. So there was a very high-profile case where the woman was recording the man who was harassing her, and everybody was telling her, "Oh, he didn't do anything. You want to ruin his future. You want to damage his reputation. Look at you. You're wearing piercing in your lips as if this is something bad." So we need to, as psychologists, we need to help create this community-based bystander program. And if there are online platforms that help women speak out and share stories, maybe psychologists would help with that, moderating this. We need to reframe public space as a right, not a risk. And as a clinician, a lot of people experience shame as a result of sexual harassment. And then they even experience shame when they speak out against it. So we need to help clients reframe the experience from shame to strength and also identify the existing resources that could help them fight sexual harassment. Sorry for rushing, but I wanted to keep my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation, and sorry to make you feel rushed, Dr. Henry. Certainly a very important topic, and thank you for jumping into it and outlining some of the experiences of the participants in your study. I think we have time for one question. So just to answer it briefly, and again, we'll have more time during the panel discussion to dive into it in more depth. But we have someone asking, I was wondering whether there were posts written in different languages, English or Arabic, or other languages, and whether there was any difference in the posts, example between more focus on individual versus systemic factors.
That's an excellent question, actually. And so when you do qualitative studies, you do the translation and the back translation because there were posts in English and there were posts in Arabic. And sometimes there's this funny thing in Egypt where people say we do have Egypt and we do have Masr. So Masr is Egypt in Arabic, but I think it's a common plight, and so we did have both Egyptian, Arabic speaking and also English posts. But when it comes to the qualitative research, this has been the story of my life because when I look at the data in Arabic, but then I have to translate it. And then because this is how I write my papers and this is how I want to express the studies in the journals I've been publishing in. And so it's a lifetime conflict that you always have to struggle. But that's a great question. Yeah.
Well, thank you for answering it. And yeah, again, certainly a very important topic. Thank you for coming here today to talk about this. And we look forward to diving into this discussion a little deeper during our panel discussion.
Thank you.
For our fourth speaker, certainly last but not least, but we have with us today Dr. Mashoud Olenrewaju, who will be presenting his work on the topic of global migration. Dr. Olenrewaju is a trained community psychologist and professor at Adler University in Chicago, Illinois. He has extensive research experience in administrative advocacy and grassroots organizing. He's a passionate human rights activist. He's dedicated to utilizing community resources to drive actionable progress, particularly in advocating for the rights of migrants, displaced communities, and other marginalized groups. His work focuses on promoting alternative refugee resettlement systems and enhancing community-led solutions. He's got expertise in administrative advocacy, program development, community participatory research, and policy analysis. Dr. Olenrewaju collaborates with the diverse stakeholders to address social and health disparities. His research and practice are grounded in critical and decolonial approaches, emphasizing empowerment, social justice, and the integration of traditional African systems, including Ifa corpus. And I apologize if I didn't pronounce that very well, but I did my best. As a posthumanist and Africanist scholar, he explores the intersections of cognitive, physical, psychological, spiritual, and social dimensions of human life, aiming to transform contemporary understandings of community and solidarity through inclusive and localized perspectives. Dr. Olenrewaju, welcome. We're very glad to have you with us today, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
You
Okay.
can see your screen, and it looks like it's on the presenter view
Okay.
rather than the presented view. I think that's working.
Is better now?
I think so, yeah. That looks good on my end.
Okay. I really want to see my note, but it seems like I cannot see the note. So I'm just going to talk through some of this, and I'm better off when we are talking about I cannot even see any of you. That's not good. I want to see people. Give me 1 second. Are you still seeing my presentation?
I don't think we're seeing it anymore.
I took it off. I took it off. I want to make sure. How about now?
Yes. And again, it's uh, the presenter view.
It's still presenter view. Okay.
I think that looks good right there.
Okay. Um, I'll go with this. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for everyone presentation so far. I've certainly learned a lot. I put this here as an opening statement, and I would like to read it because, um, it certainly mirror a lot of what I'm going to be talking about and what I've heard people say here today. So, um, migration is often discussed through numbers, and I'm sure we're all familiar with that, right? Flows, borders, crisis, and management. But we know beneath all lies a very deeper question, which is what brought me here today. Like, who is allowed to belong? And I think that's becoming a more common sort of uh, crisis today. Belonging should not be a crisis. It should not be anything near psychological crisis, but that's what we are dealing with today. So, uh, my presentation sort of call itself bordering belonging, the way belonging itself become governed, regulated, and unevenly distributed through power, right? I tend to draw from my clinical community psychology, and in case you are not familiar, I'll introduce you all to it very soon. With that, I'm able to explore, we were able to, I mean, people in my field were able to explore immigration governance as not only moving people across border, well, who is protected, who is not protected, who is restricted from getting in and getting out. We're able to analyze it in this sense. So, and I also came from, at least that's what brought me to be talking about border. I'm guest editing a special issue right now with my colleagues for the American Journal of Community Psychology. It's called Interrogating Orders and Bordering, a community psychology for mobility justice. Well, we are the final edit, of this special issue. Hopefully, when it's out, some of you will be able to share it and see it in the world. Now, these are the people that I partner with. I'm in Illinois, in Chicago. This organization, all are part of the people that I think with, I work with, I partner with to talk about, think through border crisis and border epistemic injustice that is going on. So I thought it's important to kind of highlight them here. Now, what do I mean by bordering? Bordering, belonging, you know. So belonging is regulated. There's no other way to describe that. It's granted, it's denied through power, through state power, through political power. Uh, Recently now in the US, we're talking about the documenting migrant, meaning since the 1951 convention that would declassify refugee as, refugee, suddenly now we're the government here is asking people to be, although it's not passed yet, but the idea is like we're going to now ask people to come back so we can re-interview them and engage them in some kind of redocumentation, which in itself, this is where the idea of the savviness narrative comes to the picture, or citizen hierarchy coming to the picture. Like this is where we start talking about who belongs, who doesn't belong. And when we talk about humanitarian gatekeeping, for instance, the access, the vulnerability, the trending, all of these are neglected. And this is leading to, where psychological crises become into the picture. Um, I want to quickly run through statistics, right? Currently in the world, we say we have 280 million uh, migrant, international migrant. First migrant because of the wars that we can. So we have refugee that is about 43 million, IDP 75 million, The unfortunate part is these wars don't make themselves. This war is also part of the bordering system. Suddenly we're talking about Sudan. We left Sudan. Now we talked about Gaza, and then suddenly now we've moved on to talk about to be talking about Iran. The problem is the inflow of back and forth of human people is not really sort of the highlight of when we start thinking about this war, this crisis in the larger space of it. And 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 I will share with you soon. These numbers don't do justice to what I'm saying in that sense. Right now, I mean, according to what some of my colleagues previously have said, some people are denying climate for what it is, but we know, we can see it, and we know by, I mean, at least this is the World Project that by the year 2050, we're going to have 260 million internally displaced climate migrant. And this internally displaced migrant is because a lot of them are motivated by drought, flooding, deforestation, rising sea level. As you all know, many of the migrant or displaced community are coming from where issues like flood, drought are much more pronounced than you can imagine, right? I want to speak of my own constituencies in Africa where drought is now overly taking ownership of a lot of the land that usually used to be agri land before. Economic migrant. We have 169 million migrants around the world right now. The problem with this part is if we're talking about people sending 80 billion home, when we talk about the community on the move, community left behind, the money that people are sending home, the effect of it is not shown because people are overworking, something we call in social determinant of mental health, overemployment. People work here for this, but when you talk about what is being used for it, when you talk about the transfer fee, nobody is compensated justifiably in that sense. Gender in this sense also, we have 48% international migrant workers across the world. Children, which we've seen that a lot of these kids, especially those ones that end up not in the Western atmosphere, we see them working in factories. There's a lot of scholarship that has discussed this, that have campaigned for this. And I guess the point that I'm making with that is that all of these authors, these professionals that have studied migration have described the limitation that this data itself bring to bear, right? The description of some of this data, because of the limitation that it plays on how we describe people, the legality of the word that we're using to make a case for people. Some of these people have spent religious hours to bring to the table that we're missing the most important picture around the border or bordering of people when we don't pay attention to the data the way it is being captured because there's limitation, because there's some part of the world that we cannot get to with the way we describe data currently. So if I move on quickly, then that leads us to what does it mean to belong in a world organized by border? And a good example that I bring to you is, for instance, this is a right base. So the GCM, the CR, the GCR, the SDC, they are all meant as a human right based approach to migration. But unfortunately, they create a system of deservingness because their translation into community is not as invested in as you will. All of the organizations I showed in the beginning, if I ask them, even because I'm in these places, if I ask them about SDG, GCR, GCM, they're not familiar with it. So this is creating some kind of system of deservingness because it becomes who gets to go to this discussion, who gets to decide the fate of these people in this sense, which if this is not translating and UN, another global body is spending millions on this, then we're caging people, we're caging the border process in this case too. So because of the bordering framework that we use in my in my field of community psychology, we already kind of decided, or we know that belonging is psychological, it's a psychological and social condition. Uh, Borders produce exclusion and hierarchy system. Community create alternative belonging system, but this alternative system is not allowed to flourish because the international space, international humanitarian sector has a lot of power that is not translating that, as I said before, in the communities. So my field of community psychology, which I want to introduce quickly because of the kind of work we do, how we accompany migrants, how we evaluate intervention that is designed to support migrants or develop analysis to policy makers. My field itself is the community psychology is the study and practice of communities, system, and social structure that shape well-being and how collective action promotes more just and healthy society. You know, a good sample of that is the principle that we use to practice. So many of what has been said before will show up here. So we think ecologically, right? And that give me access to kind of help migrants when we're talking about how to include them into the system post or even pre-settlement, right? Prevention mechanism, empowerment, as Dr. Henry discussed, and I was laughing because I can relate very well with the way empowerment was discussed in that sense. Participatory knowledge system in that sense too. This is the core principle of community psychology as we use it to practice and help migrants when they are resettling in their respective community. If I'm going to operationalize, for instance, prevention itself, this is what we say, operationalizing prevention by transferring structural conditions that produce distress rather than treating people after they occur, right? This is what we're watching out for, where we create system to support, even before they arrive in their post-final destination state, we're creating system to support them. And this is what I mean by that. So when we look as psychologists, when we think about isolation, for instance, some of the work we do in the local community is, for instance, for senior citizens that end up in these communities where there's no family with them, right? What we carefully have done in terms of belonging is to create systems that support them so that they are not isolated, so that they don't develop loneliness syndrome. And this has been working, but if I ask again in terms of the larger humanitarian structure, how well is that larger humanitarian system, how well is it understanding what we do with this system in the local community to support this senior individual? This isolation is not just for the senior individual, it could be anyone. I'm just using the senior individual that are always isolated in this case when they don't have family here as an example. So what we do is we create an early intervention to support people like this. We create community education around it and share this and work with the government or political system in respective city so that they can develop sort of intervention mechanism that supports such, in this case, the senior citizen in that sense. Another thing that I think we're thinking carefully as community psychology in this case, when we think of the principle that when I said ecological frame, right? If you think for a minute, the traditional system of the world have supported that the health world itself is a living system, right? And that the abuse, the mass barrier that is going on, where migrants don't have time to kind of process the death of their loved one, and then they move into another community. That is showing up in the ecological display of the world. I recently started using land regurgitation. So if you eat as a person, if you overeat, for instance, and you're vomiting, that's what I mean by land regurgitation. But in the case of mass barrier, where we're feeding the healthy world more body than necessary, and this is showing up, we're having this ecological rupture, and that is affecting each migrant that is moving across border because they are the most unhoused, the most unsettled. Every community they get to, they have to deal with the ecological rupture in a way that even some of us that are settled, at least we have protection, but because they have to go through one state to the other state to the other state, this becomes some kind of collective grief that we're not addressing for them. So what we do as community psychologists, before they get here, because we understand this science of ecological destruction as it is happening, we're preparing space to kind of meet people, to support them, to celebrate them. I tend to use more of critical community psychology more, which is to engage justice-oriented approach, to help people to talk about power, oppression, social structure that shape human well-being. And the way we do it, if I'm just going to use power and oppression, for instance, and I'll give you a good sample of this, um, you know, a lot of people, when we talk about migrant, the first we always say in the sense of research is, oh, let's support women and children, which is not wrong. But we often neglect the young male migrant. There's a lot that is missing in male young migrant research, you know. But I'm tying that now to something more important that I don't think the word is also talking about, organ removing or remover, you know. If you think about all of the communities of the world, the first people to leave are young male because they're the one that can make this journey, right? First journey that they have to make. And what happened is many of them become vulnerable because when they get to some of these communities, the last investment they have is either to sell their organ to move to the next level. And some of these organs are removed while they're alive, which makes it even worse, right? Is removing the spaces and the places where this is done is not somewhere anyone wants to be done. And we're supposed to pay attention to them because many of them are supposed to be on the lifetime of dialysis, but because we don't even know this exists, right? Because of the power analysis of critical community psychology, we're able to study each of the region, the corridor where people are sort of moving from, and you will know which of these corridor has more of organ trafficking. So, for instance, in the case of Africa, all of you that are coming from North Africa, any migrant that you know that comes from North Africa, at least 70% of the young men that come from Africa will have been organ trafficked. And I don't think it's spoken highly because if people don't trust it, they're not going to share that kind of story that they've been trafficked organ, or they have to do, they're dealing with that. So there's a lot of international initiatives. But again, the thing is, the way we develop this humanitarian system, it's always difficult for trust to come in. So that these migrants, when they show up in this different community, until they get to trust you, they cannot share that they're dealing with it. So we have the protocol, we have the against transitional, we have the Istanbul Declaration, but all of this means nothing if it does not translate in the community, if the migrant cannot trust enough to kind of speak to this. And I imagine the reason why this is becoming more prominent. It's been happening for a long time. More prominent is a heart. Selling a heart in the open market, in the organ trafficking market, is as much as 500,000. A lung is 150,000. But if you ask the question like, how much are these migrants getting? Some of them are not even getting up to $10, because all they need is to move to the next level. But they're doing this at the rate of, I just want to get to the next level. Unfortunately, and there's a lot of news report of body washing up in Europe beaches, missing different organ part because of this traffic, as it were. So my encouragement, is when belonging collapse, the human body itself become sort of a broader economy, and that's what we're seeing with these young men, which is why I'm calling attention to it, at least in this international world stage. And this is the sample, right? Any one of these young people, you see this mark means they've been trafficked. I mean, their organ has been removed. So why I think psychologists should pay attention to this. So fundamentally to the need of reduced demand for organ, right? Which is fueling the exploration. We need to find a way to set up a system that is going to help the world. Some people need organ in different part of the world, but we need some kind of ecosystem that guide this process, so that people are not being trafficked illegally and organ is being removed and sold in the open market. We need to address the health deterioration that leads to this organ failure across the world. We need to increase supply of organ donation through legal channel at least. Otherwise, the migrant community, these young men particularly, will keep falling victim to this as it were. Um, and I know I rushed it, but that's my sort of my presentation, if you will.
Thank you so much, Dr. Olanrewaju. A very moving presentation, and certainly some moving images that you presented. Again, I feel like this is another presentation on a topic that we could continue to talk about for as much time as we had. But thank you for your presentation. Thank you for sharing this important work. Maybe we have time for one quick question. We do have a question. Somebody's asking, what immediate pathway should we as professionals be working to implement and strengthen in response to this issue?
I think there's a lot of, like I shared, there's a lot of mechanism that's already developed, right? All of the declaration and, but what I think as a problem is like this is not translating into the local community where people are sort of migrating from. And to capture it very well, the pathways, it's not like we know how often, where, and how the everyday people are moving through these systems. Some of us have to track, some of us track it because it's what we do. But unfortunately, until we create some kind of mechanism to meet people where, halfway in this sense, we cannot track it. We cannot keep up with it because, I'll use the word people are sneaking even out of their own community. And for instance, in Nigeria, we have a syndrome called Japa syndrome. Almost every professional in Nigeria is left. And some of them are going through the same route just to get out. So it is not like it's easy one system, but if anything, I think we need to have a relationship with the government, make them sort of be a buy-in into this. Even if it's just to provide some kind of community education for whoever is leaving, maybe that might be some kind of way to address this in a way.
Great, thank you for your answer. And I know it's a broad and complex topic and a tough question to answer in a very short period of time. But thank you for addressing that. Thank you to all four of our speakers for your presentations, for sharing your work on these topics. We are going to move now to our panel discussion where we will field some questions for all four speakers together. You're welcome to answer if you feel moved in the moment. You're also welcome to ask each other questions, to talk to each other, to respond to each other and have a dialogue and a conversation. What this part of the program is for is really to dive into these topics in a little more depth here. So that being the case, I will start us off with a question. And again, please feel free, anybody, to answer here. The first question I wanted to ask is, what suggestions or recommendations would you give to the United Nations about how your work could be used to support efforts for collaborative action? So from the research that you've done, how do you see, what message do you want to take to the United Nations for how to use your work to work so we can all work together on these?
Well, if you allow me to pick this up, Linda, do you want to say first?
Go ahead. I'll wait for you.
Okay, I think the central point is that from my work is that we should not think that if we keep politics away from our children and adolescents, that they lead a better life. I think they need to be aware that they live in a complex world, and dealing with political issues is part of their lives, and it does not hurt their general well-being if they get involved into this early on. And of course, parents should be careful. Parents should be loving, but they should take these responses, these questions serious, and should not respond by, "Oh, you're still too young for this. Oh, this is only concern of adults." And I think it is important that we integrate children and adolescents. I'm not speaking of preschool children, of course, but I'm speaking of, well, elementary school children, junior high school children, that we should take their questions seriously. That's my point on this.
Thank you so much for that answer. And Dr. Steg, I see that you have a response as well.
Yeah, so I can say many things, but let me two things. First of all, I think the UN is a reliable source of information for many people. People trust organizations like the UN much more than politicians or businesses. So you could be a source to communicate why it's important to act and what people can do in any of the topics that we discussed today. And be the voice on behalf of the population, because there's a lot of concern about many issues among the populations, and politicians not always act upon it. And I would think that you have a better way to communicate with these powerful people than most citizens have.
What a great point to make. Yeah, thank you for stating that.
I sort of agree with Linda, but I also kind of want to take a stand that in the world where we live today, how people feel about UN is sort of taking a backstage. I think UN needs to rewrite its image. I'm not sure how they're going to do that, but I think that's creating some kind of conflict with what is up. So I teach social determinant of human rights, and my student, I use the human rights framework to teach it to them, and they used to love it. But for the past sort of 10 years or so, students are asking now, like, what stand is UN actually taking? And it's making it difficult for me to explain this every day, especially when all of this explosion, this political indecisiveness coming into the picture, right? These are future people that we want to work with UN. But the way they consume this is like, what is UN standing right now? And if we don't gain their own attention now, I don't know which other stakeholder we're talking about, because they're the one we're supposed to sort of be really kind of advocating to take ownership of this space. But which is why I said, as much as I think we want people to work with this system, with UN, UN itself needs to show us, or show, this new generation that it's not falling down his mandate, if you will.
Thank you for including that perspective in there, Dr. Olenrewaju. Yes. I want to check if we have any responses from Dr. Henry, or any responses to each other so far.
Well, the only thing I would say that the UN is in a very sensitive position. I mean, they want to help, but then they have limitations of the governments, the policies, the funding. So I think there has to be a middle ground where the UN can help psychologists spread the word about psychological science and how it can help people, but then also understand that there are certain limitations. I mentioned earlier that there was a study that was conducted by the UN about sexual harassment, the incident of sexual harassment, and then it seems that there was some governmental pressure that they had to withdraw the study. And so I can appreciate that they are in a very tough position sometimes, but they're doing their best. I know that this has been a big issue, whether you're talking about taking care of forced migrants in Egypt. This is also a very critical place for the UN trying to help, but then they also have restrictions. And so, I appreciate the question, but I also understand the limitation of the position of the UN. I'm sorry if I'm not giving an optimistic position, but that's how I feel.
I'm not a political scientist, but I would also say, can you really look at the United Nations from one perspective? Because of course we cannot change the structure of the United Nations, but if you deal with the Security Council and if you deal with the General Assembly, that seems to be two different worlds. Yeah, because the Security Council is it is stuck in the interest of the five great powers or the five veto powers, and at the General Assembly, I think the important stuff happens there, but it is without power. So, in my opinion, and that makes it very difficult to say what the United Nations as such should say learn from science, and it's very difficult. I don't want to lash out. Don't want to lash out against just the current president of the United States, but that's a difficult point, and the country that always said "niet" has also not become any better, and so yeah, that's what I think.
So I may need to just jump in for a moment here. So our role at PCUN is to carry the mandate and support the mandate of the United Nations through psychological science and the research and expertise we have. So I think all of you gave very uplifting and very pragmatic as well recommendations and presentations. And I think where we come in now is what's next, right? How do we support what's going on right now in terms of positive initiatives? For example, introducing the term mental health into some of the policies that we recently did, which were not there before. So there's baby steps, there's incremental steps that we take that are very meaningful down the road, but there are huge areas that we don't have the power to do. So the reality is we do what we can, and each one of us then contributes to the greater good. How we do it is up to each one of us and our organizations.
Thank you, Dr. Gopal. We are talking about complicated issues, and we're talking about how those complications create uncertain times, right? This is part of what brings us here to discuss. And moreover, how do we address these uncertain times collectively, recognizing that we are all in this together, that again, what affects one of us affects all of us. And what does that mean for how psychological science can pave some ways forward? The research that the amazing research everybody here shared today, what does that mean in terms of working together to find a way through these challenges? To follow up with that question, also wanted to ask, especially giving each of our speakers own context, own regional context, institutional context, professional settings, what forms of collective global support would you like to see related to the topic of your presentation? So giving the perspective of your regional experiences, what support would you like to see in this area?
I don't want to go first again.
Oh, no, it's a very broad question, so I'm trying to make up my mind. Now, one thing, what I would like to say is that I very much appreciate that you are looking for and trying to implement the psychological knowledge into different fields of applications. Because you indicated already that I'm a member of the Dutch Scientific Climate Council. We recently published an advice on how to make better use of behavioral insights in climate policies, but have been similar reports on other domains. And bottom line is there's very little knowledge and capacity on behavior change in many policy institutions, in many governments. So I appreciate that you try to to communicate and to disseminate this knowledge, because like you have heard in all the presentations, it is critical to also better make use of this knowledge. So we can bond and join forces to make this happen more often, because at least in the Netherlands, but I'm sure this is in other countries as well, among policymakers, there's very little knowledge on these topics.
Thank you, Dr. Stay. And Dr. Bonicke, you
Yeah,
have to go first that time.
okay. I think what would be from the perspective of my study and what would be very helpful if we stop seeing the world only be in as a peaceful world if we curb the power of our enemies. This seems to be a very strong reflex at the moment, that there is a logic of you can only preserve the peace if you're strong, if you have more weapons than the other side, and this is something that really is very detrimental for mental health, and at least my study could, at least for a certain segment of the population, show that very clearly. And I think we have a in Germany we have a minister of defense who said 2 years ago, Germany has to return to being ready for war. In these words, I know that nobody speaks German around there, but kriegstüchtig, be ready, be prepared, and be competent in war. This is a logic that is from a psychological point of view will be a psychological harassment, and this is something where we can only take another position, and this is also where events like this will, I think, help.
Thank you as well, Dr. Bonicke.
I think for me, I mean, this has been a lifelong struggle where you want to give a culturally inclusive psychological science. And so the UN, for example, part of the UN is the WHO. So I know when they were revising the ICD-11, they invited representative from Arab countries, including myself, so that they would have in their agenda that they heard the other voices. And we actually had a very nice 3-day conference in Beirut, Lebanon. And so one of the things I would love for the UN is like whenever they want to use the psychological science or to help people, whether with forced migrants, whether with women empowerment, is to take care of this idea of culturally inclusive approaches. Because again, let's not forget that psychology, started from a Western individualistic conceptualization, and sometimes, it can be actually used. I'm not saying you don't use it, but you need to also make it more culturally inclusive, as I showed in my study, is that all the principles that we learned in grad school, and they're very helpful, they're extremely beneficial. But then when you hit reality, then you see, okay, we need to modify them a little bit. We need to make them culturally inclusive. So I'm thinking of whatever programs the UN is doing. I don't think my experience with the WHO was perfect, because I felt at the end we were just representing the Arab world to get our perspective. But for example, it does not have cultural formulation like the DSM-5, for example, and they look at mental illness as more of a universal problem. So I'm sorry, I'm digressing here, but what I'm trying to say is that whenever programs, whatever science that the UN is taking, psychological science, is it culturally inclusive? Is it culturally responsive? or are we automatically using principles that have been studied on the West and not really modifying them and elaborating? So sorry to sound controversial, but
Controversial is good. I'm thinking about language justice, at least for my presentation in terms of belonging. Um, at least if I think about migrant that are coming this way into the global, into the Western hemisphere, um, the language justice, the epistemic injustice is enormous. It's unbelievable. Uh, part of the wellness package, part of the belonging package is that when we need to translate something for migrant and we don't find the appropriate word in the English word to sort of conceptualize it, we're losing people. It becomes a crisis for people, and this has been going on forever. So if UN is going to do anything, we need to revive languages. We need to find a process to help solidify this, so that when people come here, whether we want to do it through Duolingo or whatever system, but something needs to be done to revive some of these languages, at least the ones that are dying out, or the ones that people can bring with them, and then we can sort of find a way to kind of put them into these local communities. Otherwise, we are not helping people reach their agency when we can find the right language to describe their crisis, if you will. You know.
I couldn't agree more, because, for example, all our instruments that try to assess mental health or any other thing, they are so highly influenced by well, the Western and the traditional ways of assessing something. Then usually you have a measurement instrument that comes in 90% from the United States, published first in the United States, and then it's usually translated, but inappropriately, because what you said is a concept it does not translate. But then we nevertheless translate it and measure what we have known from the from the American context, and it's many things are quite wrong. So I fully support the revival of the languages as such, and not just pushing everything towards a unified English. Also for us, it's of course good to be able to communicate in English, and many things wouldn't be possible but using that for any kinds of say mental health or even political orientation assessment, this doesn't work.
I'm seeing a lot of head noddings from everybody.
Yeah, but so related to that, you were referring if the assessments are done sometimes, but many times, at least in my field, most studies are being done in what we call the weird countries, and then we assume that it is appropriate and similar everywhere across the world. So we need to do more cross-cultural studies in the first place.
With bottom up instruments, I would also say,
yes.
and not just with the the MMPI from 1937, or that was a joke, but yeah.
It sounds like we've been answering this question already, but we do have a question from the UN missions, and so I'll just put it out there as well in case it feels like it would be helpful for us to talk about it a little bit more. But we have a question that asks, how can psychologists help the missions navigate these uncertain times based on their research? So again, from your own research, from the work that you've been doing, if the missions are asking for help and support from the psychology arena, what can we offer them? And I do feel like we've been talking about this a little bit already, but just to check and see if there's anything anybody else wants to ask or talk about.
There was a paper once by Jesse Jackson, a civil rights activist in the US, where he says, why do psychologists not give us answers? Sometimes people would expect that we just give them a very short, simple recipe to solve everything. And I think we can, but we need to also back it up by research. But it's been always difficult. Like, when you say I want my research to be generalizable. Okay, so you're doing this research. What does it mean for the general public? This has been always a struggle for psychologists, let's be honest. But it doesn't mean that we cannot have recommendations at the end. We cannot help people. But it has been always a challenge for psychologists because things are more complicated and someone may make a presentation, but then another person may make the opposite presentation. There's no absolute truth in psychology. Even when you do research, like scientific research, there's always theories keep changing. But I think what we can is just we can share our research and make it more accessible to the public, and think about the implications for policymakers, but being tentative because it's not always something that we're 100% sure of. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I fully agree because we have the tendency to say it depends, and then we come up with 20 factors that might affect the likelihood. And I can understand that then if you're a decision maker or a policy maker, then you think like, well, okay, leave it. So, and I think we can do more than we do now to generalize more.
Yeah,
Still,
I can support that. We are trained in scientific or academic skepticism, and that's good because we shouldn't believe our findings too much. But at the same time, this should not prevent us from speaking out. For example, I've discovered in the policies of the German Psychological Society that they have recently really changed into, yes, we're publishing also, well, opinionated stuff. They have introduced something like the ultra briefs, which means they're two-page online publications where something is said about civil courage for democracy, and this is something that I think is necessary, not only worthwhile but also necessary to summarize and take our findings to the public without always saying, well, there could also be other standpoints.
So the question is, the missions are asking what they can do. Is that the question? Oh,
Yeah. So if the missions were to come to psychologists and say, "Can you help us with these challenges?" I think we've outlined several challenges in all these four topics, right? And what does that mean for us as psychologists to support the UN in trying to address these challenges?
so I have a counter question for the missions. Are they willing and are they available to also kind of work with us? Because mission is difficult to get, and I say that as part of AP UN team. We have this uh, event where we do like annually where we reach out to the missions and tell them about our project in the year. And I'm not calling out any mission in this case, but it's like you're pulling your teeth with pliers to get mission to kind of respond. So if they're asking what they can do, first thing is to be visible, to be available, uh, uh, to hear some of this. Everything that has been said here, the mission can take it to their home country, and kind of address it. So they're like the gatekeeper. But if you're not available, if they're not that visible, if you don't have easy access to them, I don't see where we're going to go with that. So the first thing is availability, I think.
Thank you for bringing up that point. And a big discussion that we're having here. Thank you for everybody contributing to the discussion. I'm noticing that we have some questions clustering around the theme of the next generation. So we have some questions. We have one person asking about, is there a need to take these concepts, these frameworks that have been outlined here of psychology, and then adapt them for more generational acceptance? So what is it? The question is, How well and how much can we directly pass these concepts on to Gen Z? And then another question, a similar question is, how do we make this more accessible, these concepts more accessible to the next generation?
I think I'll take the first one this time, I guess. I think the Gen Zs are very, very curious. Curiosity is not the same as a critical in that sense, where we need to push the bar with the Gen Z is for them to be more critical of the discourses, right? But they're more curious. They have more science at their availability. Everything we say here, they can transcribe it into like a quantifiable ones tomorrow and then understand almost everything we say. But that is killing sort of creativity and critical discourses in that sense, if you will. So um, we can do the work. They have access, is what I'm saying, faster than we will. But how critical can they push and whatever mechanism we need to design in that sense, maybe that's where this needs to lead. I don't know if I do justice to answering that, but I think as much as they have it, I think they also need some kind of critical process to work around this.
Critical process. Thank you for that answer. Yes.
I'm not fully familiar with the labels of Gen Z and what is Gen whatever, but I think from my study, what I learned is we have to look a bit down in age. So it's the adolescents have to be integrated because that's the critical phase, not the same sense of critical as the colleagues use it, but the critical life phase seems to not so much to be in the 20s, or that what psychologists often call emerging adulthood, but for me it's adolescence because old studies already say that much has been is in a firm frame by age 17. This has known from famous sociologist Karl Mannheim from the 1920s, and it has remained so, and it is confirmed by the study I conducted. And I think we also the United Nations have the obligation to turn to earlier ages because there we're losing people in the sense that we now have a situation in Germany, for example. I don't know how much this is the case in other countries, but we have a change from the young were always voting more to the to the left side of the political spectrum. Now we have the first voters, 18 to 21, they are the strongest. The strongest group is the new right-wing party in Germany, the AfD. Many may have heard of. So what we have to do, I think, and what the United Nations should also focus, but who am I to say what the United Nations should focus on? But I think the age is earlier where to look also for critical thinking, as Mashoud said.
Thank you as well for that answer. Maybe as a follow-up to that question, similar to that question, what does it mean to talk to the next generation about the importance of education in psychology? Going back to what you were saying, Dr. Bunke, about critical thinking, how would we want to communicate the importance of getting educated in psychological science to the next generation?
I'm thinking whether our generation has been educated in psychology. Yeah, we, because we're trained, but more generally, was this the case? I think what is challenging now with the younger generation is that they're so strongly influenced with social media because they're so much online all the time. And yeah, that's a field I know little about, but it's intriguing me. But they're strongly influenced, and that also explains why they vote more for the right-wing party. I think it explains why the manosphere is becoming very prominent. There's all they're steered in a direction, and we need to counteract those influences, which is not easy to do. And education can play a critical role, I would say, so that you at least at schools that they learn more about this. But I'm not familiar about what is in the current program, so I can't say whether they do a good or a poor job. Maybe some of the others.
I think we need to make the case for this generation that psychology is a wonderful tool for them to improve the quality of their life, not just about critical thinking, but it's about problem solving. It's about having analytical skills. It's about relating to others. It's about empathy. I think I can sometimes teach introduction to psychology course to freshmen coming to our university. I love teaching that because then sometimes people don't realize the importance of psychology. It gets to a point where people want a double major, but maybe we need to start a little bit earlier. You just need to tell them, you need to sell it to them. And the way you sell it to them is that to show them how relevant it is to their lives and how it transcends everything they do. And also when people get to know the concept of empathy and interpersonal skills and social skills, these are these are transferable skills that you're not going to just use in your personal life, but in your professional life. So I feel like we haven't done a good job selling psychology to the public, let alone to our college students, let alone our high schoolers. I mean, in Egypt, for example, people do study psychology, but it's more like the art section of the secondary education, which is not the prestigious section. The prestigious section is more like science and math and physics. And so, but then, and also people, we need to sell it to them. We need to say it's just not just concepts. It can help you in your life. It can help you with your relationships. It can help you professionally. And you can start early. You don't have to wait until college to do that. Yeah. It's an amazing experience when you teach people psychology and they love it.
I
Thank you
think
for
I
this.
think Dr. Henry, I think along that line, I think because for me, I didn't come into psychology also until I was doing my PhD in community psychology, right? I think we need to break down the different area, the different component of psychology to this generation, because if we keep saying it as one sort of, psychology, it seems like there's a gap in there too. That you can practice as a community psychology. If I wait until I became, maybe there's a deduction there, but if I wait until I become a community psychology PhD before I start knowing the mechanisms and the tools that psychologists use, anyone can do it, is what I'm saying. But maybe we need to kind of educate more in the sense that, there's clinical, there's organizational, there's promotional, there's, all of this area. Maybe it would then make more sense as to just keep saying we have psychology, which is one uniform, and it's not, you know.
I
Thank you
just
for
want to
that
add
input.
that we often talk about psychology as the hub science, right? When we look at the network of science and different, scientific disciplines and fields, psychology is in the center of it. And so it's a lot of times thinking about, for younger kids or communicating that message. Are you going to interact with other people in whatever you do? Of course you are. Are you going to be embedded in a social context? And think about the relationship of individuals within a context. So, regardless of if that's biology, criminology, health sciences, all of these ways, psychology is the hub, is the uniting connector. And I think it's about selling that central role that whatever you do, it's going to involve interacting with other people. It's going to involve understanding individuals embedded within their context and maybe highlighting and pushing that message more.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. Maybe we'll call that the bookend to this discussion. Made some strong points all around. I really appreciate it. And again, a discussion that we could continue for quite a long time if we had more time. And unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our program. And so at this point, I will turn the reins over to Dr. Carr, who has some important messages to wrap us up here.
I would like to thank all of our speakers and especially SPSSI President who just jumped in and make sure that we understand the intersection of psychology. I really appreciate your time, insights, and efforts. We would like to acknowledge at PCUN the generous efforts of our co-sponsor, the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Zambia to the United Nations. We would also like to acknowledge the support that we have gotten from our partners, International Association of Applied Psychology, Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology. We would also like to acknowledge the support that we have got from our supporters to PCUN, Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issue, SPSSI, Society of Pediatric Psychology. We would also like to mention it would not be possible to have the PCUN Day today without the generous support of SPSSI. We are so grateful for the support. We would also acknowledge our friends, Society for Environmental Population and Conversation Psychology, Org Vitality, PsyChi, the International Honor Society in Psychology, and lastly, International Council of Psychologists. We at PCUN would also like to acknowledge our officers, our committees. So our committees are 5 in number. We work in program committees, advocacy committees, outreach committees, publication committees, and finance committees. We would like to acknowledge the effort of each of the member who has come together and make sure that this day becomes a reality. It takes an year of hard work, consistency, perseverance, and it takes a lot on people who really want to make wonders and make sure that psychology has a dialogue among other scholars as well. And we are so happy that this is the beginning, and we are making sure that we are continuing with the legacy of PCUN. We would also like to acknowledge the efforts that we have gone from PC representatives, Professor Dr. Kimberly Khan, President, David Levitt, and Sam Abbott as well. All the technicalities that you see today and the seamless program that you are seeing today is all because of SPSSI, and we would like to acknowledge that. Lastly, before ending the event, which was possible because of our 4 speakers and their time and effort, I would also like to remind our participants to please fill in the survey that is being given on the screens just right now. It talks about the feedback and the demographic of yours, and we would highly appreciate if you can give us that information. Before ending the session, I would also like to acknowledge the fact that we at PCUN, like I mentioned, one of our committee works in publication, and the publication committees has the book series. We would be publishing a lot of books under publication series. So the publication committee works and has published 4 domains of books on diversity, simplicity, student-oriented, authoritative, and rest of the union book series. And presently they are working on their 5th series, which is called as Global Perspective on Gender, which will be published in May 2026. It's an inexpensive book series because the publisher is Emerald, and they are making sure that it has been sold to a point of $50 so that everyone can afford it. And before moving, you can see that on screen. And I would appreciate if Sam or Gursevak can put the email IDs of Professor Ellen Congress and Professor Harold, so that if you have any questions pertaining to the book series, you may reach out to the professor directly, and they would appreciate to answer your questions. Thank you so much for joining us today. We acknowledge all of your time and the time zones that you are in. It means a lot for us. Thank you so much. Highly appreciate it.
And thank you, Dr. Harleen.
Thank you
for everything that you brought to this process as well. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our UN ambassador. Thank you to everybody involved from PCUN. We hope that this was a meaningful experience for everybody, and we look forward to seeing everybody next year for Psychology Day 2027.
And the feedback survey should open the moment you will end the session. It will pop up on your screen. Please acknowledge and fill the feedback form. Thank you. Highly appreciated. Thank you, Gursewak.
Thank you all.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.